few people told me they can't make it tonight, so we'll be recording. And we're gonna experiment. This is the first time our community is doing a JLI course on Zoom. I'm very excited and honored that we've chosen to meet together. We can't meet in person. We can meet virtually. We have a wonderful community, and it's great that we're able to begin another course.
Rabbi, we don't see you. We don't see you.
You don't see me?
No, I don't see you.
I see you.
I do. He's on the bottom. He's on the bottom.
I see you.
No, I don't see him. I don't
Hold
know.
on, do you see me now?
Yeah,
No.
That's good.
yeah. Now you're in the lower left corner.
You
That's
see me?
good.
Am I in the center now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
No, I don't.
might. So Lynn, you gotta play around with your.
Well, what do I do?
Go on the top, it says share.
Uh,
Or view options.
What
it
about
says-
now?
I see you now.
Okay, good.
Okay, at the
All
bottom.
right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome
Good evening. Yeah.
to our very first the very first evening of a wonderful series, Secrets of the Bible. Again, under different circumstances, we're not meeting in person for this course, but you know what? We can meet together virtually, and hopefully we'll be able to accomplish much of what we typically are able to do when we are together. Again, we are recording this evening for those that registered and have not been able to come on tonight for whatever reason. So we'll welcome those who will be joining us in the future as well. Now, to this evening's course and this season's course, Secrets of the Bible.
Right.
Well, then Secrets of the Bible might sound like something you're very familiar with because we've all studied the Bible or know many of the tales of the Bible. As a matter of fact, many have grown up from the time they were children, reading the tales of the Bible, the stories of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Noah and the flood, Jacob, Esau, Moses. We've studied these stories together. Many of you that join us for our weekly discussion. But tonight's course, we're going to do something we haven't really done yet, which is we're going to take a very special deep dive and a different look than the typical Torah study, the typical Bible course. Now, as we know, in Judaism, we like diversity of opinion. And our sages say that one single narrative, one single story in the Bible could have many interpretations, sometimes up to 70 different perspectives, 70 different angles. This course, we're going to try to take the angle that's pretty much left a secret, the mystical, Kabbalistic view to many of the stories. Our sages and the Zohar, which is one of the preeminent Kabbalah texts, describe that just as a human being is comprised of a body and a soul, and both components are necessary to live on this planet, to live in this world, in this life, well, the Torah too has a body and a soul. Let's get our slides in order. Has a body and a soul. The body is the tales, the stories, as well as the law. That's the body. What's the soul? The mystical, hidden meanings that are contained within the stories and within the laws. Just like a body contains the soul, but when you look at a person, the first thing you see is their body. When you interact with them, you realize they're a living being. Well, the tales of the Bible as well. The stories and the laws are like a vessel, a container, a body that conceal, but also convey great, deep, mystical teachings. And ironically, it is because there are these secret, hidden teachings that the lessons of the Torah are relevant for all times and all places. Because even though the story itself may seem very ancient, and the world may have been very different, but the mystical, spiritual themes reverberate and can apply and exist at all times in all places. And we're going to find, I believe, many of you will find your lives deeply enriched by the secrets we'll uncover these coming several weeks. In summation, we're going to be presenting for 6 weeks, 6 stories, 6 tales that we may know in the Bible, and then we're going to peel back the cover and we're going to dive deep into the secrets and the mystical teachings that we may have never before uncovered in each of those tales. And we're going to also try to find a contemporary and highly personal application in each of those stories, each of those tales. I would just like to point out that for this course, currently I have everybody muted. It's a little bit of a struggle to balance between everyone's feedback and, it can get overwhelming. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave for now everybody muted, and at a few different points during the course, I will unmute everyone. If you have a pressing question that you feel like needs to be addressed immediately, there should be an icon that looks like a hand that you can kind of lift your hand, and hopefully I'll see that and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. I want to again thank you all for being on board this very exciting journey, taking a deep dive into the secrets of the Torah. Tonight, with perhaps one of the best known tales of the Bible, the story of the Tree of Knowledge, Adam, Eve, in the Garden of Eden. We're going to examine this well-known story, and I'm sure you'll find some very interesting secrets indeed. We're going to start by exploring some of the well-known texts, well-known details of the story, and we're going to actually use a video like we like to do when we're in person to make those cases, to share those stories. So let's just review the slides. Here we have it. There's the body of the Torah, which is the stories and the laws. The souls of the Torah, the soul of the Torah is the mystical meaning. And it's because of these mystical meanings that the Torah has perpetual, eternal relevance. Now I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment. And we're going to share it in a different manner so we can all watch this film together. Oh, sit tight. Oh. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear the sound. Okay. Oh.
God Almighty planted a garden in Eden, in the east, and he placed there the man he had created. And God Almighty made grow from the soil every tree that is desirable to the sight and good for eating, and the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. God Almighty took the man, and he put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. And God Almighty commanded the man to say, "Of all the trees of the garden, eat you shall eat. And of the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, do not eat of it. Because on the day you eat of it, you shall die." They were both naked, the man and his wife, and they were not ashamed. The serpent was the most shrewd of all animals of the field that God Almighty made. And the serpent said to the woman, "No, die, you will not die. For God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be as God, knowers of good and bad." The woman saw that the tree is good for eating, and that it is lusty to the eyes, and the tree is desirable to make wise, and she took of its fruit and she ate. And she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. The eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed the leaves of a fig tree, and they made themselves girdles.
When God confronts Adam and Eve about their transgression, Adam blames his wife, and Eve blames the serpent. God, however, is not satisfied with these excuses and decrees.
To the woman he said, "Multiply, I will multiply your pain and your pregnancy. In pain you will give birth to children, and to your husband will be your desire, and he will rule over you." And to Adam he said, "Cursed is the soil on your account. Painfully you shall eat of it all the days of your life. By the sweat of your brow you shall eat bread, until you return to the soil, as from it you were taken. For dust you are, and to dust you shall return." God Almighty made coats of skin for Adam and his wife, and he clothed them. And God Almighty said, "Here, the human has become like one of us, to know good and bad. And now, perhaps he will send forth his hand, and he will take also from the tree of life, and he will eat and live forever." And God Almighty sent him out from the Garden of Eden to work the soil wherefrom he was taken.
All righty. So there we have the tragic story of the rise and fall of Adam, Eve, humanity. Now we're going to go back to our previous slides. All right. So this story, the story of Adam and Eve, their creation, their single commandment to manage the garden, their failure to follow those instructions, the interaction with the snake or the serpent, the mistake of Adam and Eve eating that fruit, and the ensuing punishment brings up many, many questions. Perhaps one can make the case more questions than answers. I'm going to temporarily unmute you all, and it's going to maybe be a little chaotic, but in a moment I'd like to hear, we'll try to manage this so we can have everyone one at a time. If there are any very large questions that come up, if not, as you can see on the screen, we're going to begin sharing a whole series of questions. So I'm going to unmute you for a moment. Let's see, this is an exercise. I'm not sure if it's going to work. Actually, no, I'll allow you to unmute yourself. You should have the ability to do so. Any major questions, glaring questions that arise from the story, from the film that we just watched, the story of Adam and Eve? Go ahead, first come, first serve. Anybody want to take a stab?
I am him. What's the question?
Rabbi Jeff.
Yes. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you.
Give us.
The question is, first God said that they would be killed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't seem to me as if he went forward with what he said at first.
So you're asking, it seems like the punishment God threatened or told them they're going to experience did not transpire. Thank you, Jeff. Anyone else want to shout out real fast a question that comes to mind from the film and the tale that we just explored in the Bible? Anyone else? All right, so let's review a few questions together. Question number one that's not on the screen. Big question. How and since when does eating a fruit impart knowledge? Does that make sense that eating a fruit would cause you to suddenly have a certain type of knowledge? What exactly is going on? And what is this tree of knowledge? And what is this fruit? Is it magical? What exactly is going on here? I'm sure it's a question that comes to mind. Question number two. Isn't knowledge a good thing? Since when does God want to keep us from having knowledge? If there is a formula to achieve great knowledge, surely God would want us to have it. So why is God so eager to keep Adam and Eve away from this tree of knowledge? That's question number two. Doesn't God want us to enjoy the gifts of life and knowledge? Number three, more specifically, since when is knowledge a crime? Since when is knowledge a sin? Surely that's something positive. We're all here tonight study a course, to grow in our knowledge. And I assure you, it's a good thing you're here. So what's wrong with Adam and Eve? Why are they being punished? What have they done wrong? Let's continue.
Rabbi,
Yes.
maybe it's Barbara Newman. Maybe God just wanted them to observe his desires, his whatever.
Very good. So, let's run through. We're going to run through a host of questions, and then we're going to try to give some theories that will hopefully answer many of the questions. I'm very grateful that you shared that. That's a very possible and valid point. Nachmanides makes an interesting observation. He says, if knowledge is so good, these are the words of Nachmanides. By the way, those of you that have books, you can take a look in the student book, page 5. Some of you don't have books, so I'm trying to make it so that those that haven't yet had a chance to get their book can follow along. Nachmanides, text to page 5. If the tree was so good to eat, so attractive as a source of wisdom, why did God withhold it from man? God is good and does not withhold goodness from those who live wholesomely. So Nachmanides asked the question we're asking: why does God want to hold back this gift? And the effect, the crime so terrible that they should experience death, pain, toil, what's going on over here? Number 3, as we just said, isn't knowledge a good thing? And if you want to take a fast glance, page 6, text 3, Maimonides, Moshe, son of Maimon, famous physician, philosopher, halachist, scholar, asks or writes in his book, some years ago, a learned man asked me a great question. It would appear from the basic reading of the Bible, of the Torah, the human being was originally intended to live like the rest of the animal creations, without intelligence in his mind, without the ability to distinguish between good and bad. Adam's disobedience was to procure for him the great perfection which makes the human unique, which is a person's knowledge and our intellect. It appears strange that the punishment for disobedience should be elevation to the pinnacle of perfection. So again, what's Maimonides saying? Man used to be limited. We used to be lacking something very important, intelligence. And because man rebelled against God and ate the fruit, they should be rewarded with what makes man so unique and special. When I say man, I don't mean man, I mean humankind, men and women, that have this great gift of intellect. Surely, Adam and Eve would have been punished. This doesn't sound like a punishment. It sounds like a reward. What's going on over here? Question number 4. What's going on with my... Hold on. Something is going on with my slides over here. All right, we'll make the best of it. Hold on. Did Adam and Eve have free choice before they ate from the tree? Did they have free choice?
Yes.
Well, they must have had free choice, because otherwise they couldn't have chosen to have the tree of knowledge. But conversely, the tale seems to indicate that their knowledge and ability to choose came from the fruit. So which one was it? What came first? The chicken or the egg? The freedom to choose, or the choice to have, the insight to have the freedom to choose? It seems like we're stuck in this vicious cycle. How do we make sense of this story? As you can see on the bottom of the slide, I hope you can see it. How did they have free choice without knowledge of good and bad? If you don't know what's good and evil, how do you choose? And if they did make the wrong choice, how could they make that wrong choice if they did not have the freedom of choice? Good question. That's question number 4. Question number 5, and I know I'm going through this a little fast. I want to make sure we have enough time to give the explanation. But first, there's a very fascinating parable. Great Rabbi Yaakov Kranz, known as the Dubner Maggid, famous rabbi. He's quoted many times as having many wonderful Mishalim parables. He said, imagine you have a chest full of coins, and the key to the chest is locked inside the box. How could you open the box? The key to the box is inside. Or I suppose a more modern iteration would be if you left your keys, you locked your keys in the car. How can you unlock the car to drive the car, right? So you need the freedom of choice to have the discernment to have freedom of choice. And that's the Dubner Maggid's parable that he gives. Now, number 5, question number 5. Let's analyze if the serpent did anything wrong. We make the serpent into the villain of our story, right? Who's the villain of the story of the tree of knowledge? Well, the participants, you got God, Adam, Eve, and the serpent. But the serpent is the bad guy. Did the serpent do anything wrong? Let's take a look. The serpent said to the woman, no, you will not die. If you eat the fruit, you will not die. Why doesn't God want you to eat the fruit? Because God knows on the day you'll eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be as God, knowers of good and evil, or good and bad. So the serpent says, you eat the fruit. Someone had this question. The serpent says, God says you'll die. The serpent says you won't die, and they don't seem to die. What does God say to the humans? The human has become like one of us, to know good and bad. God is saying the human is trying to be like God, to know good and evil. So now, again, we read this verse already. Perhaps he will send forth his hand. He will take from the tree of knowledge. He will eat and live forever. So God and the serpent are saying the very same thing. The serpent says you won't die. God says you're not going to die. You can live forever. The serpent says you're going to become the knower of good and evil. God says the humans, by eating the fruit, know good and evil. So why is the serpent the villain? The serpent is saying the same things as God himself. Big question. It sounds like God is confirming and affirming the words of the serpent. So what's wrong? What did the serpent do wrong? What did the humans do wrong? Is it bad to aspire to be more godly? Question. I'm gonna stop my share. There's something wrong with the slides. Let me check. Let's see if we can fix it. Bear with me another moment. Actually, no, while I pause the slides, let me take a picture. This is wonderful. We're all sitting together. We're learning remotely. Smile for the camera. Say cheese. There we go. All right, now let's try to fix our slides. Let's see if this works. Open it. No. One more time. Here we go. No. All right, one more time. If not, we'll just stick with what we got. All right, we'll stick with what we got. Question number 6, still asking the questions. Then we're going to give the answer. And the slides are supposed to. All right. Why did eating from the tree cause death, pain of childbirth, and struggle? What's the correlation between eating this fruit and suddenly human beings have to experience mortality? Even in life, to bring life into the world, there should be so much pain. And again, this is a question that many of us, 50% of the population, anyone that's been a mother, knows intimately. And the story is claiming that because they ate of the tree of knowledge, there's this great pain in childbirth, and human beings need to struggle to make ends meet. Why is that? What's so terrible? Which brings us to question number 7. Why did eating the fruit trigger an awareness of their nakedness, of the need to be clothed, and shame? We read about how Adam and Eve suddenly became aware of their nakedness. They need to be clothed, and there was a sense of shame. What is the correlation between the tree of knowledge and feelings of shame, awareness of not being clothed? There are so many more questions, but I think we've given 7 powerful, strong questions. How did the fruit bring the knowledge? Why was it forbidden? If knowledge is a good thing, how could that be the consequence of doing a sin? Did Adam and Eve have the freedom to choose if they didn't have the awareness of good and bad? What was the serpent's crime? The serpent seems to have just said whatever God eventually says. Why were the punishments of eating the tree? Mortality, pain, and struggle. And lastly, what was the association? What about the fruit caused them to be aware of their nakedness? These questions are not mystical questions. These are questions of the basic narrative of the story. What we're going to uncover now is that by peeling back and using the teachings of the Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and the secret teachings that were for many years kept a secret, they weren't part of the text of the Bible, many of these details will begin to make sense. It's all going to start. It all starts with a very famous mystical idea. And for this, if you have a book, please turn to page 10 in your book. Dr. Moskowitz, you have a question? Please unmute yourself so you can share. Doctor? Were you trying to get my attention? All right, feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question. All right, so if you're on page 10, you might see figure 1.4. This might not look so Kabbalistic, but what you're looking at actually is a map of the conceptual makeup of the soul of the human body, of the human being. Now, obviously the soul is a spiritual thing, so you can't really map it out physically, but this is a chart of what is referred to as the 10 Sfirot, the 10 human faculties. A human being can be broken up from a Kabbalistic perspective into 3 general components: our intellect, our emotion, and our behavior. So how do we assimilate or interact with any given experience? It starts with how we intellectually assess and absorb the information. I'm giving just a real fast overview and then we'll dig deeper. We have the way we emotionally respond to stimuli, whether it's love or fear or hope or nostalgia or sadness or anger. We have the emotional way we interact with something. And then we have our behaviors, what those emotions lead us to do. And the totality of the human faculty, according to the Kabbalah, is divided into 10 parts. Now, why is the Kabbalah interested in the 10 midot, the 10 attributes of human expression? And again, we'll talk a little more in a moment. The reason is because the Bible says that man is created in the image of God. What does it mean that man is created in the image of God? Well, there are a host of different explanations. But the Kabbalistic explanation is that just as man has these 10 faculties, these 10 arenas, these 10 areas of human expression, intellectual expression, emotional expression, and behavioral expression, well, God has a parallel 10 components, a parallel 10 modes of relating with planet Earth, with humanity. And those are called the 10 Sfirot. If you've even nominally touched or dabbled in Kabbalah, you're certainly familiar with the 10 Sfirot. Those are the 10 components, the 10 ways that God interacts with the world. And that's why in the Bible we read that sometimes God relates with kindness or strictness or compassion. Those are 10 different ways that God interacts with the world. Now let's start with the intellect, which is what we're going to talk about today. The intellect is divided into 3. And again, these are some very fundamental Kabbalistic ideas. It may be a little complex, so please listen carefully. We'll start off with the very first step of the way the Kabbalah breaks down the intellectual process. The first step is called in Hebrew Chachma. I don't know, can you see my cursor? I hope you can. My cursor is over the word Chachma. Give me a thumbs up if you can see my cursor. All right, so let's try to fix that because I want you to see my cursor. If I can't, we'll we're all still exploring how to make use of our, oh, I don't know what I just did there. Anybody out there? Oh, there, okay.
You can tell him now.
We're here.
All right, you're here, okay.
We
All right,
see-
so I'm gonna give up on my cursor. Look to the right of the screen, please. And you'll see the word chachma, wisdom. And this is the way we conceive a new idea, a new theory, a new teaching. Anything that we absorb intellectually starts off with a basic idea, the basic grasp of a concept. You'll see why we're heading this way in a moment. So let's say, I don't know, what's a good example? Give me a good example of something that we learned recently. Let's say you learned that there is a mystical teaching in Judaism called Kabbalah. So you start off with the basic core kernel, the basic idea. But the next step is to start really making sense of it, breaking it down and analyzing. Where did it come from? How does it interplay with Jewish tradition? What does it mean? Where do you find it? That breaking down of an idea is called Bina, understanding, analyzing and understanding an idea. These are two intellectual exercises. I hope we can all fathom or relate to occasionally having a good idea and then working it through trying to make sense of that idea. Can anyone give me a thumbs up if you can relate to that idea of thinking of an idea and then really developing it and building it up? I need a thumbs up just so I know that everybody's like, okay, good, very good. So that we can all make sense of. The next step is what gets confusing. The next step is going to be hard for us to make sense of. And the next step is the crux of our discussion this evening. So once you've thought of an idea or learned of an idea and you've analyzed it and made sense of it, the next step is, in the Kabbalistic conversation, is called dat. Dat is typically translated as knowledge, but that's an incorrect definition. What is dat? Dat is the way we assimilate information into our worldview, into our perspective, and it becomes part of how we feel and experience reality. Dat is the ability to relate to ideas and see the way they apply to ourselves. Dat is described as the link. I wouldn't call it the missing link, but it's the link that takes an idea, makes it personal. And once something becomes personal, we can relate to it. So let's say you learn about something dangerous. Well, when you think of it and understand it, and suddenly say, oh no, I don't want to interact with that dangerous thing. I would say COVID, but we're done with COVID. I don't want to talk about COVID while we're on the call. But let's say you learned about it and you discover, oh, there's ways to be careful. So dat is the link that makes an abstract idea personal. There's a very interesting parable to explain to us what dat is. In this shtetl, in the old country, there was a simple, illiterate farmer. And one day he gets a parcel of mail. It's a letter. But he's an illiterate farmer and he unfortunately cannot read the mail. So what does he do? He goes to the local cheder teacher, the local teacher in the school. He teaches the kids how to read, so he's got to know how to read. And so he says, Yankel, Melamed, Yankel, the teacher, do me a favor, read me this letter. Tell me what it says. And so the teacher takes the letter and he starts reading. Dear Shmerel, this is your brother Feivel, and I'm writing to tell you that unfortunately your father fell ill and he's passed away. And the funeral was X, Y, and Z and all the information. The school teacher finishes reading the letter. He looks over and he sees that the poor illiterate farmer has fainted. Why did he faint? Because he just learned some very, very deeply painful emotional information that related to him. The school teacher may have understood the nuance of the letter better, but to the poor farmer, it was personal. And dat is taking information and making it personal. And all of us, we can relate to this in many different ways. And of course, today there's a whole new idea where you can learn something and it can touch you and it's not even true, but we're not going to go there now. And so these three steps, chachma, intellect, an idea, bina, analyzing it, parsing it, and dat, making it personal. These are 3 steps in the human experience. Where do we know this word dat? Because the tree of knowledge is called the tree of dat.
Really?
Tree of knowledge. And the word continues, dat tov hara. So if you don't believe me, I know you believe me, but if you want to take a look real fast, let's go to page 2, verse 6, which is what we heard in the video. It says that they were placed into a garden, and there was the tree of life, and the tree of knowledge, good and bad. In Hebrew, Eitz Hadat, tree of knowledge.
What page is-
Page 2. Page 2. We have all those verses. We didn't see it inside. We listened to it in the video. But if you look at this, the 6th line, it says, and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. So what did Adam and Eve do? They ate from the tree that conveyed dat, emotional attachment to ideas. Okay, make this interesting. What's going on? So here's the question that I have for you. Imagine you know something, or you need to know something. You need to make a decision. And it's, let's say, a medical decision, and you have 2 choices. You can reach out to an objective professional who doesn't know you, doesn't care about you, but they're educated. So they have all of the information, but it's not personal. Or you could consult to make an important decision with a very close friend. They don't have a degree, they don't have the knowledge, but they really care about you, and it's highly personal. So who would you go to if you had to diagnose an illness? A professional? You'd go to both. Oh, so Lynn, always with the right answer.
I would go to my rabbi.
Oh,
You'd go to your rabbi. And what if your rabbi told you he's not qualified to make medical decisions?
He would help me work it out.
He would certainly help you. And what if you were looking to do a better job running your business? You could hire a consultant who does this for a living, or you could ask your buddy who really cares about you.
both.
Or both. Lynn, now you made it so obvious. But let's say you can't go to both. Who would you prefer? The expert or the close friend? So Lynn, what you're actually saying is a very, very important point, which is both. There are advantages to the professional.
Right.
There are certain strengths to a close friend.
Mhm.
Who has that? Who has the personal, intimate concern and interest? The close friend. And so really the question is, what's better, to be objective or subjective? What's better? Noah, you're muted. But what do you think? What's better, objective or subjective?
Depends on the circumstance.
Depends on the circumstance. No, you're still muted. Oh, no, you're not.
The objective professional would be the, most likely smarter choice than.
So
Yeah.
Noah is saying that in a professional question, you might want to speak to the professional. Okay, very fair point.
Right.
But the point that I'm trying to help us understand, which we're trying to use layman's terms, but it's really a deep Kabbalistic idea, is what it's like to have not just an idea, but to be subjective about it because it's become personal. And every idea that you assimilate, once you fully absorb it, if it becomes relevant, you have a certain degree of subjectivity because it's about yourself. And that's what dat is all about. Dat is the essence of our humanity today. Because human beings, and please don't, you might not agree with me, but listen up carefully because I think this is the truth. Human beings can never be entirely objective about anything if it's relevant to us, because every piece of information we assimilate affects us and how we see reality. Once an idea is absorbed into our mind, it becomes part of our personality and our character. As a side note, that's why Judaism is so concerned about gossip, about speaking poorly about another person. Even if gossip is true or if gossip is not true, once we assimilate a statement, a declaration, or a fact, it clouds how we see reality.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what dot is, the assimilation of information and making it highly personal. Okay, so now you're asking, okay, we just talked about human psyche. What does it have to do with God? What does this have to do with Kabbalah? And here's where we go. God also has dot. God has 10 sphirot, 10 divine, holy, spiritual expressions, manifestations of how God relates to the world, to humanity, to his creation. And God also has dot. Because God, although for some of us it's hard to imagine, is deeply engaged and aware of every facet and aspect of humanity and his creation. But there's a difference between human dot, which human dot is intimate knowledge to the point where all knowledge becomes personal, and God's knowledge, which is that God is all knowing. I'm not going to read this text inside, but text 5, if you want to bookmark it, is a writing of Rabbi Schneur Zalman of Liadi, also known as the Alter Rebbe, and he applies many of these great mystical teachings to our story, and he explains that the crime, the problem of eating the tree of knowledge, or forget the problem, what happened when they ate the tree of knowledge is that in a piece of information about good and bad that was once not personal because Adam and Eve could not relate to evil, suddenly became relatable. Suddenly bad became part of their interest, became part of their human experience. God knows, hold on, listen carefully, I'm not done yet. God knows things, but he's unchanged by them because God is God. And by the way, this is not a judgment. We're just giving some building blocks to understand what the story is talking about according to the Kabbalah. Human being, we internalize everything, and everything that we know becomes part of who we are. Dr. Moskowitz, are you trying to say something? Because we can't hear you.
I was trying to say something.
Lynn, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. The way I feel about it is Adam and Eve were very innocent in the beginning. They really, they had choices. They really didn't know much about anything. And possibly, maybe the reason why they ate the fruit was to ultimately become like God. In other words, to assume God's image, and that's what God wanted.
So Lynn, you're, as always, you're ahead of the curve, and I want to thank you. Yes, in a sense, what we're saying is that Adam and Eve sought to lose their innocence.
Innocence, exactly.
They wanted to expand their horizon,
right, and
expand their knowledge,
God's
to lose their innocence.
Innocence, and to be made in God's image.
Because God can know everything, but it's not. It doesn't emotionally skew and twist his perspective because God is God. But they wanted to be like God. They wanted to know everything that God knows and experience everything in God's world. But the problem is you can't know everything and maintain innocence, because when they become aware of evil, I'm skipping a little bit ahead to the punchline because you were so wise in sensing that. To know good and evil is to become attracted, desirous of evil, and to lose your innocence.
Right.
It sounds like Mr. Moskowitz wants to talk.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying. Doctor, please unmute yourself. Click on the button that looks like a microphone with a line through it, and then we can hear your voice. Because I'm asking you to unmute, but you need to actually do it. Doctor, go ahead. We hear you now. Go ahead. Loud and clear.
Why did God himself say, here the human has become like one of us? How come he's us?
How
many gods are there? Is there one
How many gods are there? That's a very, very good question.
So why does he say, here the human has become like one of us? Why didn't he say like me?
Because I think what God is saying is that humans are trying to become part of they think that they're going to become part of a circle of knowers. So he was talking from man's perspective. if you could become like God, then there could be multiple gods. And so from there, so the translation is God projecting what the humans were hoping to do, which is to become part of an elite team. But reality is that nobody could be like God, and that's the point we're making. Adam and Eve thought they'll become all-knowing like God, but all that happened is they became tainted because they became like God, aware of evil, but unlike God, the evil touched them.
I could spend 3 hours on like one of us.
Certainly. By the way, there's more on the subject. I'm just trying to give the simple answer because you're right. We could spend 3 hours on the subject. And Lynn, by the way, you asked a similar question a while back. And another answer to this question is the answer that I told you, which is that God in his humility in occasion speaks with the royal we, kind of allowing the angels to be a part of the conversation to teach humanity about the need to be humble. So even though sometimes you absolutely dominate and you're the only authority in your field, humility says, you know what? Let the other people around feel like they're part of the decision making. Allow other people to be part of the action. So
Right.
Lynn, you also wisely asked that question a few days ago, and it's another answer that the doctor is asking. Dr. Moskowitz, I'm glad you asked that because that is an important question and an important point. And I was wondering if somebody was going to point it out. I was hoping not because, so thank you thank you for bringing that up. So let's take a, is that?
Jeff Newman?
Jeff, how are you? Go ahead.
I don't understand. We start off by God telling him, if you eat the apple, if she eats the apple, you're going to die, right?
We're going to get there. We're going to get there. I don't mean to cut you off, but we're going to get there. Before the end of the session, if I don't get there, don't let me off the hook, okay?
Okay.
So let's take a look just one more. So God has that. God knows everything, but it doesn't get him dirty. Human beings, we're a mishmash. We're playing in the arena. And so the knowledge becomes part of our psyche. And it's because we internalize everything. And if you think about it, it's true. We cannot become tainted by our experience and our information. And it's not a problem. And that's the point that we're going to get to soon. It's not inherently bad. It's not inherently a problem. It was just a change. So what does it mean that they became aware of good and evil? We asked, isn't knowledge good? What's the sin? And if they did sin, why are they being rewarded with this knowledge? And did they have free choice? So here's what I would say. The knowledge Adam and Eve received was not an intellectual upgrade. It was a tainting of the pristine, objective knowing. They became downgraded, where everything became emotional. And we know that it's very hard to make a cold, intellectual, objective decision when we are emotionally involved. And again, it's not a problem to be emotional. We're humans. We're supposed to be emotional. But the caliber of intellect that Adam and Eve had was downgraded. And that's what Maimonides writes in text 15. Adam and Eve thought they would have a greater degree of intelligence, but all that happened is that the intelligence became less subjective. And Maimonides, as the ultimate intellectual, to lose objectivity to Maimonides is the greatest punishment. And when you read his text, and again, because of the time constraints and because we're on Zoom, I'm not going to read it inside. But if you read the words of Maimonides, you see for a real intellect, the most painful loss is the loss of objectivity. And that's what Adam had. So the knowledge they had, the dot they achieved was not an upgrade. It was not a reward. It was a demotion. God was trying to protect them from it, and they didn't let God protect them from it. They chose to eat from the fruit. And that's what it means that Adam and Eve were able to choose. Because although they didn't intimately have a desire, an attraction to evil, they still had the capacity to choose. And I've seen some scholars and Jewish thinkers write that Adam and Eve actually desired to have this muddy view. They wanted to know what it means to desire because they wanted to be in the arena on planet Earth. And they felt like without having an attraction to something, they cannot fight, they cannot struggle, and they wanted to have that struggle. Now, you might be wondering, why would anybody want to subject themselves to a struggle? But that is the choice that Adam and Eve made.
Masochists.
Well, we'll see soon. We'll see soon why there was some depth to their choice. But before that, I want to point out another interest. Oh, here. Okay. So before they ate the tree of knowledge, they had objective knowledge. So this is based on the words of Maimonides. So there were things that were true and false. They were purely intellectual. True, not true, are two intellectual parameters. Once they ate the tree of knowledge, they were no longer able to see the world with that degree of clarity. All of a sudden, some things seemed good, things seemed bad, things were confusing. And that was the downgrade, because once your emotion is involved, and all of us, everybody on this call, without exception, knows what it means to be torn about a decision, because our intellect says one thing, but our emotion, our feelings say something else. And it creates great torment. And I'm sure all of us can relate to that. Lynn, yes?
I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
I don't think Adam and Eve, and I could be wrong, knew what was going to happen to them after they ate the apple. They didn't know.
You're right.
It wasn't conscious that they knew exactly what was going to happen to them.
Indeed. They thought they're going to expand their horizon, and they thought that God was just trying to keep them out of an elite club. And what they discovered is that actually you're right. I don't think it was necessarily a choice.
It wasn't a conscious.
It wasn't necessarily a conscious
choice. What happened to them?
Yes, it's quite possible. There are different ways to read the story. And as I said in the beginning, there are 70 angles to every idea, but it's certainly plausible that they didn't realize what they were getting themselves into.
Right.
Which brings us to the next point. Why and what exactly is the role of the serpent? And by the way, I want to tell you something, especially those that may have been exposed to Christian theology. The story is highly interesting and highly present in not only Jewish thought, but also in other faiths. And there is a great obsession with the snake, who may be synonymous with the Satan, the evil inclination. I think in other faiths, they might use the word the devil. Really? Judaism doesn't quite elevate the serpent to that degree, the way other faiths might define the serpent as the devil. What the serpent does represent is the human instinct to make mistakes, to do evil. Before the tree of knowledge, they were innocent, and so the symbol of evil is something that's outside of mankind. It's a serpent. It's a third party. It's external, because Adam and Eve were pristine, clean, objective. So the evil, the push to mess up, came from a third party, came from the serpent. Once Adam and Eve ate the tree of knowledge, and they've assimilated and become complex, confused, tormented human beings, aware of the allure and the pleasures of this earth, and trying to do what's right, now we no longer need the serpent as a third party, because we've all got within that voice that torments us, that confuses us. Yes.
Why were they not afraid to basically go forward when God basically told them they would die if they did it?
Oh, so I'm going to give the answer now, even though the answer will probably come up later. The answer is not that they're. Hold on. Let me answer Steve, and then I think David was trying to say something, but let me respond to Steve first. I'm sorry, not to Steve, to Jeff. And again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I'm going to make this allowance. Once they ate the tree of knowledge, they committed a sin. Not only did they lose their innocence, but they created a commingling of good and evil internally and in the entire earth. And what God says you'll die, he didn't mean that they're going to die today. He meant humankind must from now on be subject to death. Why? Because evil cannot have eternal presence. And so once mankind has good and evil within them, there must be death, which represents the cessation, the termination of evil. And as we know in Jewish faith, when a person dies, so the body is interned in the earth, but the soul becomes cleansed, pure, right, and that lives on. And so death, and I'm getting ahead of ourselves, but I want to answer your question. Death became necessary once Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, because with eating of that fruit, they created a commingling, and they obscured the delineation between good and evil. And man has within themselves good and evil, and the world and everything has within it good and evil. David, you had a question, or did you want to respond to Jeff's comment? Because I want to I want to sprint to the end, and then I'll stay on for any associated comments. So let me know if we should do it now or should wait till the end.
Well, let me simply mention it, and please tell me to just let it go.
Okay.
If good. For some reason, I have in the back of my mind that the 5 worlds have something to do with this, in the sense that, as I seem to recall in nuclear physics, that harmonics and getting into a certain energy level, the world that we're in is the world of action.
Okay.
And when Adam and Eve did not have this evil, they were somewhere in between energy levels and not quite down.
So David, let me defer to the end, not because this is not a good point, it's a great point, but it's going to take too long to address, and I want to finish the train of thought, give the picture, but I'm going to stick on and I want to discuss any outstanding questions. So let's continue. So now let's think about our issue here. Should they have eaten from the tree of knowledge or not? I'm sorry, no, let me back up for a second. So what was the serpent's crime? The serpent expressed what God said. You'll eat the fruit, you won't die. And then God says, man has an avenue to live forever if they eat from the tree of knowledge. And then the serpent said, they'll know things. And God also says they'll know things. So the answer is that the serpent's crime was not an outright lie, but he obscured the meaning of dat. He obscured the meaning and the repercussions of eating from that fruit. The serpent promised, like false advertising. He said, oh, you're going to become like God. You're going to upgrade your intelligence. You're going to upgrade your awareness. But what he was obscuring and not being fully transparent about was that it was not an upgrade, it was a downgrade. They became less intellectually clear, and even worse, they became exposed to evil and the ability to make mistakes. And of course, that's the hallmark of being humans today. All of us can make mistakes. We can do bad things because we're human. Marlene, you have a comment real fast?
So why do some people have more than others?
That's a good question, because some people have more potential, and so they have greater struggles.
Some people suffer more, some people have
Yes.
more.
That's one of the unfortunate realities of life. And so the serpent didn't let Adam and Eve know they're going to become subjective and demoted and confused. And so it was false advertising, and it's not nice to do false advertising. And that was the serpent's crime, according to our thesis based on the teachings of the Zohar and the Kabbalah. So now, why does eating this fruit even convey knowledge? Very simple. Because by sinning, by not listening to God, the human body absorbed components, the nutrients of the fruit, which represented rebelling against God. And so that moment that they ate the fruit that God said not to do represented the introduction of evil into themselves. And once that moment happened, human beings could now relate to flaw, to mistake, and part of that flaw, part of that mistake, part of the human weakness is this lack of objectivity. And to understand this idea further, and I know we're giving a lot of deep ideas, a lot of abstract thoughts, but in the end, I hope this, and we're just going to be a few more minutes, I hope this will put it all together. Imagine you're a parent, and you have a child, and you have the ability to choose 2 opposite environments for the child to grow up. Option A, the child could live in a perfect utopian world. I know you'll tell me it doesn't exist, but imagine it could exist. And the child will never be exposed to anything that's evil, that will confuse or torment them. There'll be no negativity, nothing that of the ugliness that exists within 2020 human existence. They'll only experience good and beauty. That's option A, sheltered utopia, in the words of our slide. Option B is you'll put your child into a world full of evil, and they'll be subjected to terribly toxic temptations. The worst case scenario, they'll be utterly corrupted. Best case scenario, they're going to need to struggle all of their lives. Which option would you choose for your child, assuming it was available?
B.
B. Temptation?
B.
Lynn, temptation?
I would choose, they have to learn, they have to struggle. God wants us to struggle.
Okay. But imagine but that's because imagine there was no God in the picture. If you had to choose what would be better for your child, which one would you choose?
Temptation.
Temptation. Let them have the full texture of human existence.
Yes.
Anybody?
I'll go the other way.
Malka says, hey, why would you cause your child to be tormented and confused if they don't need to have that experience pain and disappointment?
Because that's all they'll know is pure beauty and goodness.
Wouldn't that be wonderful if it would exist?
Yeah, but it doesn't.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. We're asking a hypothetical.
It's not reality, though.
It's not our reality today, but imagine. So that's the point. It's not reality today.
Right.
So when God created humanity and placed Adam and Eve in this idyllic garden, and God says, don't go down that rabbit hole. Don't get yourself into trouble. Don't lose your innocence. He wasn't trying to lock them up. He was giving them the opportunity to live a beautiful, sheltered, utopian existence that knows not of struggle, disappointment, pain, torment, or the inner struggle we experience when we don't know, should we do what's right, or should we just do what feels better or makes us, or is going to satisfy the momentary urge. And that comes with a lot of torment. And listen, living on planet Earth, living in 2020, we all have many painful, difficult struggles, questions, things that really bother us. And God was trying to allow Adam and Eve a chance to experience option A, utopia. And Adam and Eve said, no, we want to go for the full experience. It sounds so much more wonderful. It sounds like we're up for the task. And that was the choice Adam and Eve made. God was not happy. God didn't want them to have to endure that. But ultimately, they made the choice. What's the saying?
Tough love.
No, well, God was not giving tough love. Initially, they chose it. And now you set it up. Now you're going to have to experience it. And that was what happened.
You made your bed, lay in it.
You made your bed, lay in it. That's what God tells Adam and Eve. You made your bed. You made your selection. Now it's unavoidable. Now you're going to have to experience this reality. So again, just to recap, many people chose option B because there is something artistic and beautiful about the struggle. Others chose option A. But now we understand why God prohibited eating the fruit, even though it provided certain perks, because God wanted to allow Adam and Eve to live a more simple existence. I would say imagine, and listen carefully to this question. Imagine if you could go back in time to a time before the internet and not know of the perks. Forget internet. Imagine if you go back to your grandparents' time. Not for the struggle. If you lived in Russia, there was pogroms. And if you lived in the Depression, imagine you could just go back in time and purge yourself of a lot of what the media and technology gives for us. Would you choose it? I'm not saying you would or wouldn't choose it, but think about it. Could you imagine if you didn't have to have all the anxiety and the stresses that media and the 24-hour media subject us to, and all of the other issues so I might make a case and say, no, the information provides a rush and we're so much more educated and we know what's going on and it's wonderful. And I would accept that case. But certainly a case could be made that a more peaceful life would be a life that didn't have all of that constant confusion and shooting up our blood pressure every time there's, a hurricane potentially within 1,000 miles. And every time there's an election 3 years away, you got to get nervous about it. Imagine if we didn't have to have that world. And so God was giving Adam and Eve the option, and he's instructing them to avoid the chaotic world. But they chose it, and so they got it. They made that bed, and now they have to lay in it. But by eating from the tree of knowledge, they did a little more than that. They created a cosmic blender by eating the fruit. And this is a very important, simple, but deep Kabbalistic truth. Human existence from then on was never simple. In the words of one of the preeminent Kabbalistic scholars, the student of the Arizal, famous Lurian teacher of Lurian Kabbalah. His student was called Chaim Vital, Rabbi Chaim Vital. Most of the Kabbalistic knowledge we have today comes from this rabbi. He said that after they ate the tree of knowledge, this is text 9, page 19. If you want to take a peek inside, I'm going to go a few minutes over because I want to take a peek over here. Know that after Adam sinned and ate from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, both his soul and his body became integrated with good and bad. Mr. Newman, listen up carefully. This is your question. This is your answer. This is significant. This is the significance of what it was written. Because on the day that you eat from it, you will die. Death of the soul and the death of the body. When he sinned with the tree of knowledge, he caused a little bit of toxic, negative energy to enter his life. And so on a higher dimension, they died from the perfect, pure world. And you know what? We talk to certain victims of certain crimes, and it's a terrible thing. And you hear them describe their victimization, and many times people describe how something died inside of them when they had to undergo that terrible abuse. And not to conflate the two, but in a sense, when a person is subjected to terrible torment or abuse, a part of them dies. Adam and Eve being introduced to the torment of this earth, a little bit of that ideal existence died within them. And then the second answer is what I said earlier, which is now they had to die so evil does not become eternal. So God is the one who's saying evil can't live forever, and so that's why people die. So you ever wonder why there's death on planet Earth according to the Kabbalah? Why do we all eventually have to die? Why do our loved ones have to perish? Because it's part of the process which cleanses our soul of any negativity, and it allows us to move on to a higher plane, a plane of perfection, of goodness. And so when Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, good and bad became commingled or blended. It's difficult to separate them. And bad became part of us. There's a part of us that pushes us to make evil decisions. The serpent left the pages of the Bible and is part of us. Not to be all dark and gloomy, but that's what the Kabbalah says. Yes, Lynn?
I have a question. Why
Please.
was the serpent so knowledgeable? I mean, the serpent wasn't transparent. The serpent knew what he was doing, or she, whatever the serpent was. Why was the serpent so knowledgeable?
My theory, because the serpent was hired to be the, what do we call it? The wild card. He was hired to be the troublemaker. God wanted him to create that tension because otherwise the story would be so boring. So God gave him that information, gave him the knowledge, and now his job was to try to spoil the pot. So now let's give some other answers. Adam and Eve had free choice. They had the ability to choose good and evil, but they weren't tormented innerly the way they were after they ate from the tree of knowledge. And that's why life became complicated after tree of knowledge. That's why we struggle. And that's why struggle existed to Adam and Eve after the tree of knowledge. Because they were forever trying to separate the good from the bad. And if you think about it, the agricultural process that humanity, civilization undertook approximately 6,000 years ago, according to archaeologists, the process of cultivating and growing and separating grain is all a process of separating the edible from the inedible, separating the edible part of the wheat from the inedible. And so the idea of the commingling of good and evil, consumable and toxic, became part of the human existence, part of the process of agriculture. And so it becomes embodied in every aspect of the human life, even our jobs. And so now Adam and Eve are being punished with torment because an inner struggle because there's evil introduced to the mix. Mortality because evil cannot endure. And toil because they now need to separate the edible part of the kernel of wheat from the inedible. And now we also understand why they were experiencing shame and awareness of their nakedness. Before the sin, the totality of the human existence was holy and pure. They were not aware of all of the sexual tension and torment that exists in the human existence because they only knew of good and right choices. All of a sudden, they ate the tree of knowledge. Their hard drive is all of a sudden full of all of these inappropriate, twisted sexual urges that are not acceptable according to the morality of God. And so all of a sudden, they need a barrier between their nakedness, their sexuality, and their ability to interact with one another. And so that's why they became aware of their nakedness, the awareness of sexuality, not in its appropriate and pure way, but the ability to be perverse, perverted, cause them to feel shame, and now they need to wear clothing. And anybody that tells you that human beings don't need to wear clothing, I think is abyssal Mashiach. And that's that. I know you have noticed, and you have, but I think that anyone that tells me that that's a normal way of living, and again, this is not a judgment on anybody, but since Adam and Eve, I read the story of the Bible, I know that ideally we should typically attempt to go around in public wearing clothing. And that's something that Adam and Eve, anyone that's resentful about that existence, we can go back to think our great-grandpa Adam and Eve, it's their fault. Otherwise, we'd all be nudists. So I bet you weren't expecting to learn that kernel of insight tonight.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's shame. And that's why our life is full of struggle. And that's why the story of Adam and Eve and the tree of knowledge is such a central tale to the human existence. Because it's the story of the torment, the subjectivity, the shame, the struggle, the toil. It all started with Adam and Eve, and we're still living with those consequences, the consequences of their decision to this very day. Now, until now, we've represented what sounds like a pretty dark, dire, and negative picture. But it's not all negative.
Right.
There are positives. So if you'll turn to page 21, now that we know about all the complexity of the sin of the Adam and Eve, let's ask a question. Are we better off following the choice, the decisions of Adam and Eve? Page 21.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? That question is the crux of this question. So some of you chose sheltered utopia, but many others said temptation. And that's exactly the question. Would it have been better if Adam and Eve had never done the sin? Or are we better off today? And I'm sure many of you will tell us, you know what? We're still better off today.
We're better off. Yes.
Before they had certain pros, and again, my slide is acting a little funny here. I apologize. Clear separation between good and bad. So there was no need to toil. But afterwards, they did need to toil to separate good from bad. Before, okay, actually, this is a backslide. Before, holiness was the only reality. So they didn't need clothing to keep their sexuality in check into appropriate times and places. But afterwards, they did need to wear clothing. But there are also pros. And instead, I could really ask, and I'm sure all of you would say these ideas, but just because the hour is late and I don't want to be accused of the serpent's sin, the sin of false advertisement. So let's take a look at the screen. One of the pros of reality post tree of knowledge is that life is a paradox. Always good and evil. Number one, when we talk to our friend and they have a different view on life, and of course, without getting into the specifics of our political conversation, many people have different opinions. And we all know that we're right and they're wrong, right? Because of course, how could anybody else be right? I know the truth. But the story of Adam and Eve teaches us that there's a lot of nuance. And of course, you're right, but there are areas that maybe you could fine-tune your perspective. And your friend who's absolutely wrong, listen carefully. In their wrong view, at the very least, there's a kernel of value, a kernel of truth. And so we need, and I know this is not popular in November 4th, no one thinks that we should be listening to each other. And that's one of the terrible, I'm kidding, you all do. But that's one of the terrible problems of 2020. But the reality is that Adam and Eve teach us, we got to listen carefully. And at the very least, respect our friends. because maybe they're wrong, but we live in a world that's so complex. No one has the monopoly on goodness, and no one has the monopoly on evil. We need to be very discerning before we kick our friend in the tachas and tell them, I don't want to ever see you again. That's lesson number one, and I hope you won't kick me in the tachas for making this point. Rear end, I hope you won't kick me in the rear end for making this point. I hope you'll agree. I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but I hope you'll respect my point and find the kernel of value in it. Point number two, many times we live life and we're severely disappointed. We're disappointed by our loved ones. We might be disappointed by our rabbi. He just said that we should value another opinion. We might be disappointed by ourselves or our leaders who are found to have moral failings that we cannot fathom. You know what? Since Adam and Eve, since they ate from that fruit and good and evil became intermingled, don't be disappointed and well, you can be disappointed, but don't be disillusioned by failings, because everybody that we're dealing with that are human. And so they're good, but they also have an inner serpent. And you don't know what a raging animal serpent they have. And so we got to try to be understanding of our fellow man. And that's takeaway number 2 of this story. Takeaway number 3.
Good one.
Adam and Eve made a mistake, a terrible mistake. They didn't listen to God. They ate the tree of knowledge, but ultimately we're better off for it because we're able to engage in human existence. We're able to engage in this world and introduce holiness and divinity even to the dark, evil corners of our minds, into the dark corners of the world, because we're engaged. We're totally engaged with reality. And when Adam and Eve were in the garden, they were cordoned off in a safe space. It was beautiful, it was idyllic, but they could not make the difference we could make, living, fighting, struggling, toiling, failing, but then dusting ourselves off and trying again. And so they made mistakes, but they didn't give up. Humanity continued. We're here today to fight the good fight. That's another takeaway of this story. Lastly, complexity, with all its frustration, also makes our life so much more meaningful. The ability to have failures helps us celebrate our achievements. The ability to have a moral failing allows us to feel good when we get it right. And the ability to have a nuanced, complex conversation while the world is going nuts, that's one of the gifts that we have today because of Adam and Eve's mistake. So we can live at a time where all the cable channels are going crazy and we could blot it all out. We could use technology to communicate, to connect, to study. And that's one of the gifts that would not have been possible had Adam not eaten the tree of knowledge and had the internet not been introduced to our world.
Right.
So did it bring downsides? Pain,
Yes.
loss, struggle, failure? Yes. But it also brings us the thrill of the triumph and the sense of achievement and the sense of a struggle. Fighting makes us better, stronger, and we have a lot to celebrate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, my dear friends,
The summation was fantastic, by the way, Rabbi.
Thank you. So,
thank you.
hold on, doctor, can I put you first in the queue? Can you be the first in the queue? I just want to give a fast recap, and then I'm going to stay on here as long as everybody here is interested in schmoozing. But I just want to close out the formal discussion. We told a tale of a garden, Adam and Eve, a commandment not to eat the tree of knowledge. They sinned because of the serpent, and they're punished. They're punished with devastating punishments: death, struggle, shame, disappointment, pain. And we wanted to make sense of the story. And so there are many angles, but we took the Kabbalistic mystical angle. The mystical angle was that the tree of knowledge represented knowledge, not in the English translation, but dot. Every fact becoming personal, intimately connected. And when they ate the tree of knowledge, good became part of their existence, but so did bad and evil. And so suddenly they became aware of all the good choices and all the bad choices. And that set off a domino effect, which introduced shame, took away their innocence, made them aware of their nakedness, made death a necessity, made our world complex. Those are the negatives. But it also introduced a series of wonderful positives, including the wonderful struggle to live and to find our inner angel, to try to outsmart our inner snake. And it's a struggle, it's the fight that we can celebrate, we can feel good, and brings us all together. And that's a real short, concise summary of today's lesson. I think if you'll think it through, we've answered all the questions, but there's so much more, because whenever you talk about deep Kabbalistic, mystical ideas and a central tale like this, there's going to be many more conversations. But I hope this adds some complexity, some texture, some insight, some secrets to a tale you may have heard, but never quite like this. I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to stop the share so I can see everyone's face. And Dr. Moskowitz, you're up first.
Okay.
If you got to go, I'm sorry. If you need to leave us, I won't be insulted. I'm grateful that you were here to join us tonight. I'm going to stay on as long as there's anybody here that's interested in schmoozing. I'm going to take another picture because I'm so pleased that we can come together like this. Doctor, go ahead. You're up first.
Okay, two parts. The first one is on page 7. Those of you who don't have a book, it shows a lot text, a lot box with the key inside, and it says the Lock's Box Parable. A parable is a morality tale or myth, a legend. What is the legend associated with it? What's Kabbalah with the legend? And then I have something to sum up.
So I didn't say that the legend itself is associated with Kabbalah. I brought the legend to help portray our question of could they have free choice without being aware of evil? And in short, our answer was they were previously intellectually aware. When they ate the fruit, they became aware. It became part of their reality. And that was the problem. I hope I answered the question. So again, it's not that the tale was brought in Kabbalah. We used it.
You have no how great your summation was, because it really put it all together. Up until then, I felt I was being prepared for the Tower of Babel, until the summation brought it all together. So the summation was worth the price of admission.
Thank you, Doctor. It's great to have you on. Aviva, great to have you on. And I miss being in person with everyone, but I'm glad that at least we can connect over Zoom. You know, before I go to the next person, I'd just like to welcome some of our more silent participants. So Adriana, it's wonderful to have you on. Tatiana, it's wonderful to have you on. Sheila and Joy. Everyone else, I think we had at least a chance to interact for a moment, but it's great to have you all on. Who's next for any questions or comments? Again, at this point, this is the informal part of the discussion. There's no pressure to stick on, although I will get lonely if you all leave me, so.
So, quick question.
Yes.
I'm obviously a lot younger than anyone in this room.
I
was
maybe a few others.
I was told growing up that anyone under the age of 47 can't learn this. Does that have any?
Noah, good question. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to explain your question. Noah is sharing a very famous idea, which is that a person shouldn't study Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, until they reach the age of 40.
Why?
So I'm expressing the question, but the answer is going to answer Lynn's question, everyone else's question. The answer is like this. Once upon a time, a scholar, a Jewish scholar, was expected to become well-versed and to commit to memory the totality of the written and oral tradition. So the teacher said, you know what? Spend the first 40 years of your life learning the body, the facts of the story, and then you'll graduate to mysticism. In today's world, none of us have the ability to devote ourselves full-time to the pursuit of any single aspect of Jewish tradition, and therefore, a class like this, which allows us to dabble and to build a picture and deepen our perspective, is not contained in that prohibition or the idea of not to study Kabbalah. But ideally, a student of Kabbalah would wait till they were very well educated on all the traditional subjects, and then they would graduate. It doesn't really apply to today's reality. I'm glad you asked the question. Who's up next? Adriana? Well, good to have you on. Tatiana?
Yes, quick question. So So the snake represents the evil inclination that is inside of us, the constantly battle that we have between the good and the bad one.
Yes, it does. And I'm glad you asked the question, because now you remind me of a comment I wanted to make in the beginning. The way the Kabbalah understands the relationship between the story and the secret and the mystical concept is very important. The Kabbalah makes the case, the Zohar makes the case, that both are simultaneously true. So the Kabbalah says the story was true. Again, try to imagine a snake that has a conversation, but put that aside. The Kabbalah makes the case that this tale was true, literally, but it is also representative of deep, enduring mystical truths. The reason why certain tales are communicated in the Bible are because those tales weren't just stories that happened, but they also communicate rich, essential Jewish values, themes, or mystical ideas. So I'm glad you asked the question. So the snake was both, according to the story, literal, but it also represents the urge that we all have, because I think we're all human, which is that sometimes we have an urge to mess up. And then we also have another voice that says, hey, come on, you can do this. And hopefully, more often than not, the right voice wins. But we all got a snake. And that's part of the story of humanity since Adam and certainly after Adam. Thank you for that question. Lynn?
Thank you.
Trump has 213. Remember.
Hold on. I'm trying to escape cable. I'm trying to escape cable television for a few more minutes. That's fine. All right, who's next? Any other comments or questions? There's no pressure, by the way. We could just shoot the breeze over here, but I want to first address any comments or questions on the subject.
I'd like to make a statement that everybody should know is that the Zohar can be bought in English.
Yes. Now, hold on. One more thing. Joy, are you on?
We're going to get a whole bunch more votes out of Arizona.
Yes, I'm on.
Joy, how are you?
I'm fine. This is all revelation to me.
I'm glad to have you on.
That is really true. I had no idea about the complexity of this story. One of the surprising things to me is the introduction of death as necessary to get rid of evil. That to me is quite a revelation.
Yes, so Judaism has, and you're right, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the way Judaism views life is that God engineered existence, or existence is engineered, and again, according to Judaism, by an intelligent design by God, very precisely. And so every facet of human existence is not only random, but there's actually, it also complements the broad picture of reality and divinity and destiny. And so according to Judaism, death exists, not just because God couldn't create a creation that could live forever, but because there's actually a purpose in death itself. We don't celebrate death. Death is a sad moment because it represents a certain distance placed between us and our loved ones. But according to Judaism, death is not the end of a relationship. And of course, that's really a broader conversation for another time. But I just wanted to make that point. But death itself is part of a scheme that helps the person have an upgrade, if you will. Again, it's hard for us to see it that way, but that's how the Jewish mysticism and Jewish thought sees it. So thank you for that comment, and it's great to have you on board. David?
Yes.
How are you?
I am fine, and you, Rabbi?
Thank God. I want to invite you to, if so let me see if I understand what you're saying. So I'm going to actually say what I think you're saying, and you'll tell me if I'm getting it right. The Kabbalah, in addition to the 10 sefirot, which are 10 models of divine interaction with the world, the Kabbalah also describes, and it's not the primary subject of tonight's discussion, although it will be future nights, which is that there are multiple spiritual worlds. Worlds? Well, there's only one physical planet Earth. There's only one universe that's physical, but the Jewish mysticism describes spiritual realities, spiritual dimensions of existence, which are entirely spiritual. And when Judaism talks about angels, we're talking about creatures existing in a spiritual dimension. And when we talk about souls, we're talking about existence in a more spiritual dimension. And so it's possible, I think you were discussing the fact that the human soul also is complex. And the soul essentially has 4 or 5 components, depending on how you break it down in the Kabbalistic perspective. And each element of the soul corresponds to one of the worlds. And again, if this is confusing to you, zone me out. And so it's possible that David was talking about the fact that part of the sin or the mistake of eating the tree of knowledge was a descent or a demotion of the human experience on a more spiritual plane. Is that something to the effect of what you were saying?
I think that's pretty close to exactly what I was saying, that I think that we were in an in-between level of reality until the apple was eaten.
Yes.
And we came down to a steady state energy level of the world of activity or action. Otherwise, and I seem to recall this discussion, is an angel higher or lower than man? And of course, man is higher, because although we're lower, we could rise higher.
Yes, yes.
And this very act brought us to that point, I believe, no?
Yeah, so it is a complex discussion. I don't want to overwhelm those that are getting an initial exposure to these kind of teachings, but eating the tree of knowledge did represent a certain downgrade, not just because there was this commingling of good and evil, but it also represented a certain descent and a certain distance from spirituality, divinity, and these higher planes of existence. I just want to point out that according to Jewish teachings, because spiritual is not confined by physical dimensions and parameters, we talk about spiritual worlds and souls and angels, but they're not actually far away. They're in existence. They're right here. They just exist on a different plane of existence. So planet Earth could be closer, meaning be more in tune with the divine, or more distant, and we could be more in tuned or more distant, but it's not a geographic distance, it's a conceptual distance. And that's why we feel so close to the souls of, and I don't mean to keep on going back to this, but it's, I think, a frame of reference and something that's on some of our minds. That's why we can feel very close to our departed loved ones, because they're not remote geographically. They just exist in a higher plane of existence that's really very close. I've seen and I've shared that actually the Rabbi Schneerson, the Lubavitch Rebbe, was talking to actually Rabbi Gordon on the West Coast, who had passed away a few years ago. And when he was a child, I think they lost their aunt or their grandmother, and the Rebbe was trying to explain to little children to understand that when a person passes away, they don't go far away. They're not like on the moon. They're like on a second floor of a 2-story home. They're just right up, right above. And it's because of the Jewish concept of these worlds are not spatially distant. They are just conceptually more abstract, but close. And so when we do something that bridges the two realms of existence, like a mitzvah, like a spiritual act, it's very easy for us to reach and connect and interact with that higher plane of existence. Again, if I go ahead, David, I'm sorry.
As an aside, Rabbi, I would choose, although I didn't voice an opinion before, the less chosen of the choice.
Utopia?
I would rather not be tempted, because I always chose the wrong thing. And you think of a tzaddik has that good and bad inclination, and yet never chooses the bad. I would prefer not having to make that choice, because I know that more times than not, I choose bad. And that was usually my downfall.
See, but David, David, as a scholar, he's thinking, David, like Maimonides, is saying that intellectual pursuit is of highest value. So why would you want to live in a world like this world that distracts us if you could just be in a reality that allows us pure, intellectual stimulation and exploration? I think that's what you're saying.
unless one was of the level of a tzaddik, that you had the innate control over good and bad.
Which
So,
essentially, if you were a tzaddik, that would essentially mean is that you're on this earth, but you're not of it. And you somehow manage to rise above the restrictions and the temptations
exactly.
of...
So you'd be functioning in an in-between energy level, in essence.
Yeah, something like that. Now, I remembered one more thing I forgot to do before we go. Oh, I'm not going anywhere, but we need to take a selfie. Right? It is, we do have the technology, and it is 2020. We need a selfie. All right, there we go. Got it. All right, I'm going to stick on until everyone goes off, but I want to remind everyone, first of all, thank you for joining. Second of all, God willing, next week, Wednesday, 7 p.m., we're going to do the same thing. We're going to explore another tale, another secret, another mystical angle. And I look very much forward to sharing that with you. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining and for exploring this wonderful story together. If you do not yet have a book, please call me to arrange to pick up, because the texts are good to review. And we also have some very interesting, in the appendices, there's some very interesting additional added readings. So I want to encourage everyone to get a book. David, that means you and some others. Marlene will have to figure it out. And Tatiana, I don't think I got your book to you either. So let's be in touch. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very nice. Thank you.
Sei gesund. Take care.
Shalom.
Bye.
Shalom.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Alrighty. Sheila, Newmans,
Yeah.
a wonderful evening. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sei gesund.
Wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
Enjoyed
Thank
being
you.
with you.
Same here. Thank
Have
you.